Great to have you listening in today. As with previous seasons, it is my hope that the guests and their stories that I get to share with you this season can provide you with the tools and or insights that you need to know that you can make it through whatever is happening for you now. And not only that, that you can have the life you want in whatever way you want that to look like. So let's get to it. I'm your host, Amárillys, and this is The Beautiful Side of Grief. Just jumping in very quickly to let you know that this is the final episode in season 4. I have loved interviewing the wonderful array of guests who have been sent my way by my gorgeous girl, Tal. And I hope the information that they have shared has helped you in some way. After all, that's why I do this, to help you. You also have my heartfelt thanks for listening in and being on this journey with me. I'm going to take a short break to deal with some health concerns, though stay tuned because I will have more wonderful journeys of overcoming and finding the beautiful side of grief coming soon for you. So until then, sending you big hugs. And now let's hear from Clint. Seriously, how much does one person have to endure over a lifetime? It seems that some people get more than their fair share of big, life-changing challenges. My guest today, Clint Hatton, is one such person. At 12 years old, he lived with his mum having suicide ideation. He was an addict, was divorced by his late 20s, tragically lost a 17-year-old son in a plane crash, experienced multiple close calls with the births of his children. Yet, he has used all of this to empower not only himself, but his family as well, to be resilient and thrive again no matter what life throws at them. It doesn't end there though. Clint is on a mission to develop courageous people to live inspired lives. He describes himself as a transformational speaker and coach, author, and a deliriously happily married man of 20 years to his bride, Amárillys. Have I said her name correctly?
You did so good. Boy, most of the Westerners over here butcher it the first time. Good job.
Oh, okay, cool. And he is also a proud dad of 3 boys. Clint helps others unclutter their thoughts, clarify priorities, and create actionable plans that empower them to become their best version. In 2017, he was awarded the Distinguished Leadership Award as a global influencer by iChange Nations, and is the author of the book Big, Bold, Brave, How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. Clint has trained over 5,000 leaders with a track record for creating energy, delivering dynamic content, and giving audiences the tools to transform their lives immediately and to live big, bold, and brave. So the intention I'm setting for this episode, which I'm really excited to get into, is to understand how we can use adversity to become big, bold, and most of all, brave in our own lives now. And this episode comes to you with a whole lot of love, and thank you for listening in. And I would like to acknowledge Tal, who divinely guides me and is the inspiration for this podcast. So welcome, Clint. Good to have you on the show.
Hello, Helen. Thank you so much for having me. You know, I've had some time between we scheduled this and got a chance to read a little bit about your story and a little bit about Tal. And I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you today.
Yeah, I think we're going to be able to take this conversation lots of exciting places because I believe you and I are pretty much on a similar wavelength.
Right.
And I know this because after Tal died, I realized my entire life had been preparing me for this event. My childhood right through to the challenges that I faced as an adult and a single parent. And then you wrote something very similar about losing your eldest son. But before we head there, Let's begin with your most precious memory of Gabriel.
Wow. The most precious memory. That is such a great question. I'm trying to think. You know, I have a bunch, but I am going to pick one. and I have a very specific reason for it. When he was 13 years old, I took him to an event. It was a father-son event. It was called Sons and Guns. And it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a group of just men in their teenage or very young adult, 18, 19, 20-ish sons. And we gathered in this big, ginormous field, and we did paintball. We shot shotguns, skeet shooting, and shot arrows, did all this testosterone generated events, yeah, exactly. And then we did the whole actual program also involved talking about, being a young man of really strong character. So we actually had some classes sprinkled in throughout the day. And then the whole thing ended with kind of a medieval style meal where they had these, and it was a surprise. They had that part hidden, so you didn't know this was coming until the end. And they had probably, I don't know, it had to have been 30 feet long series of tables, stacked together just in a straight line. And they threw some paper, just some really thick, butcher paper as the tablecloth. And they quite literally no utensils. And they had been cooking all day these barbecued. There was sausages, there was brisket, there was chicken, and they literally just dumped it all out on this table. And then they took barbecue sauce and they literally just poured it up and down on the table and then said, have at it. So we had this great meal. And, part of the reason why I shared that one, because I have a bunch. And of course, that was when he was a little bit younger. But years later, when he actually we do something here. I don't know if this is a tradition where you are, but a lot of times when they're a senior in high school getting ready to graduate, a lot of people will do photos specifically for, we call them their senior photos. And so he did a photo shoot with a friend of ours, and they experimented with something that they now do as part of their business, but they filmed a video with him at the very end after doing all these photo shots, asking him, and one was to my bride Amárillys and one was to me, of what was his fondest memory. And that was the memory that he described. And for him, it was a game changer. And I knew we had a great time, but I didn't know it. It meant so much to him. So now I definitely have that near the top of my list.
Oh my gosh. That is so cool on so many different levels. You got a video of him sharing that. I mean, that, in hindsight, those videos are so precious, are they not?
Absolutely.
And also, I couldn't think of a better way for a father and son to bond. I mean, really,
it is.
That's really elemental, isn't it? Bringing out all the things that you could just
absolutely
into and enjoy. Yeah,
it is. And I've done it with my middle son, who I did it with him at the same age. He's 18 now. And then my youngest son, we're getting ready to do that within this next year. So yeah, it's kind of a little Hatton family tradition.
Oh yeah, I love that. So can you share with us the types of challenges? Because as I mentioned in the intro, you had a few challenges when you were younger. So are you able to share with us, some of what you faced that you think were instrumental in becoming the person that you are sitting before us now?
Yeah. And I think a lot, I love the way you framed it, because, I like to use the word journey a lot. I used to use the word a lot, destiny. And it's not that I never use it now, but the reason why I like journey is because I feel like that better expresses what our lives are really like, because it's just kind of one flowing, ongoing movement, right? It's not this destination with this goal. And someday we reach our destiny and, well, shoot, what if I hit it by 60 years old? Then what do I do?
Yes,
so it's a journey, right?
Point.
It's a journey. So that said, I had what I consider to be a pretty normal childhood early on. But then what happened when, I know you read my bio when it talked about what happened with my mom. In short, by the time I was about 11, 12 years old, they had been married over 20 years. I came along very late. My mom actually had a partial hysterectomy. had half of her,
Oh.
her tubes taken out and, different things, and was never supposed to have children again. And so, but surprise, I came along, 8 years after my older brother. So I say that to say, I was very young, but they had already been married over 20 years. And my dad ended up having an affair, and he didn't just have an affair. He ended up moving out and into an apartment with the woman that he had an affair with, who happened to have a son who was about 2 years older than me. And so it was, awkward on every level that you can imagine.
Yeah.
But with my mom, what happened is, they came from a different generation. They got married he was 18, she was 16. And they got married right after he fought in Korea. And then right after he came back from Korea, they got married. So needless to say, it was the only man that she knew at all. So she ended up really struggling, started to drink, pretty heavy. And that's when the suicidal ideation came into it. We had a couple of pretty traumatic, situations like that. My brother, who I mentioned a little bit ago, he was 8 years older. So he'd already moved out, and he lived several hours, hundreds of miles away. So it was really just me and my mom to, kind of function together. And needless to say, at 11 or 12, I didn't know how to, handle that or really, truly help her. But that's the situation we had. So she tried killing herself, multiple times. There was a couple of times where it almost took me out as well. One involved a speeding vehicle when we actually spun out on a really narrow road at about 65 miles an hour. And, very fortunate that we didn't hit anything. And then another time with a handgun. And, so some very traumatic experiences. Now, I'm going to fast forward with their story so we can kind of move on. My parents did end up reconciling within about 2 years.
Wow.
A lot more to that story. There was a lot of other bad situations, but I gave you, some of the worst of it. But a couple of years later, they end up reconciling. They end up married for over 65 years, and both passed away about 6 months apart from each other about 8 years ago. And we had a great relationship as I was an adult and on, or young adult and on. So I want to just kind of set that to the side. But what it left in its wake was, I started abusing drugs and alcohol. And I did that for a lot of years. And the thing is even when I was young, if someone would ask me, oh, do you think it's because of some of the stuff you went through? My answer was, oh, no. I love to party, but really what ended up happening is a series of events happened leading up to about 30 years old. And that's when I began to really have a greater understanding in hindsight, the impact, that some of those things, those situations had on me. So what began to change for me, because, by then I'd went through the divorce that you described and, just a messy life, or I'll just say it that way, a messy life. But during that time, I joined a network marketing company that was involved in nutrition. And that was a factor. And the reason it was because they would hold these trainings. And in these trainings, it was a lot about, the type of person you could become. And they were very encouraging. And, I began to just see myself a little differently and think a little differently. You know what I mean? And so that was part of it. And then for me, I was not a religious or church person growing up at all. But about the time I was turning 31 years old, with some people that I was involved with in this company, they invited me to go to church one day. And I went solely because, I knew there was something different about them. And the difference was because I hung out with them a lot, and they had, punches in the gut too, and things that didn't go perfect all the time. But they seemed to always have peace, and they always seemed to stay in a state of hope, right? And that was something I didn't know how to experience. So I ended up accepting the invitation to finally go to church one day. And ultimately, that day I ended up deciding to give my life to God. And for me, that really began a massive transformation. So those two things, I think, began to work together between, just being involved in a company with mentors that were speaking life into me, be introduced to my now bride of over 20 years. And then, of course, our boys and life began to spin in a positive direction. And yet, as you stated earlier, we had a miscarriage. We had 2 very early preemie babies. And so, we went through some stuff.
So, what interests me about all of this, Clint, is that there was something within you that was driving you to seek something. I know within me, I was searching. And I believe when you're searching, you then start to find the people that slowly guide you to becoming what you become.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I ended up becoming a pastor a few years later as well. And I did that for 17 years up until just this last year. So faith has been a big part of my life for sure. And I think, one of the things that happened is when I just moved I lived in a rural part of Northern California at that particular time when I had given my life to God. Now, I actually grew up in Los Angeles. So I grew up in the city, but I'd spent many years up in this kind of rural part of Northern California. And so ultimately I'd prayed and I'd gotten some counsel and really was believing for whatever reason that I knew I needed to move, that there was something in it for me to move away from what I knew and to go experience something new. And ultimately, that's what led me to the Dallas area because I had never been here before. As a matter of fact, when when I rolled in, because I had a married couple, really dear friends of mine that also were moving here for a different reason. And so we ended up kind of combining efforts and decided, okay, let's help each other out. So we actually moved together, and into it, we had a 1-year commitment that let's rent a house together for 1 year so we can kind of get settled because neither one of us knew anybody here. And then after a year, of course, I'm not going to live with him the rest of my life. I would, move on. And that's ultimately what we did. But when I came to Dallas, I really felt like what God had told me was he was going to bring me a mentor and he was going to bring me the way I heard it when I was in prayer was the wife of my youth. And so those were things that I just really believed were going to happen, Helen. And like
Yes.
most people, this may have been your experience. I thought it would happen about 2 or 3 days after I arrived. All
I
right.
know.
I'm here now. Okay.
In its own time.
In its own time. And so, that ended up being real. Now, the mentor, I ended up really being connected with him probably within the first 60 days, couple months. It was pretty quick that I had a mentor come into my life. But the things, that was a couple of years and that was some waiting. And, I believe I was going through some healing, from my past and from my divorce. And we did not have children with my first wife. And I really believed that I was going to have that opportunity. And so I'm glad you asked that because I don't talk about this as much. I've spent probably 2 years just reading books and doing different
Yes.
things to learn from people, especially men that were healthy husbands and good dads. Because I really believe if I got that chance, I knew I couldn't do that being the person I used to be.
Do you know what? Oh my gosh, that's so hard case because that's exactly what I did not so long ago because I hadn't
Wow.
been in a relationship for so long. And I wanted to educate myself on what relationships look like and how, I could be the person I needed to be in a relationship after being on my own for so long. And so
Yeah.
I thought it was really important to educate myself. And I think people just think somehow they're supposed to know all this information. But sometimes you really need to go
Right.
and seek it and educate yourself, don't you?
Absolutely. And I think one of the keys, I'm glad you said that because I think one of the keys I want to point out for your listeners before I say this part is I've worked with marriages a lot,
Mm-hmm.
my wife and I, over the last 20 years. So I can safely say I'm an expert in that realm. And I think one of the reasons why that's so powerful is a lot of times we're going into, especially if you're talking about a romantic relationship, right? Or the potential of one, we tend as human beings to look for what we're going to receive from it. In other words,
Ah,
what that person is going to
yes.
bring to us, right? And a
Yep.
lot of times we dismiss growing into the best version of ourselves and what we are going to gift that person. And so it becomes a recipe for some unmet expectations and, some other things that can kind of pollute a relationship. So, I commend you for that. I think it was massive for me that I sincerely believe I would not be the husband that I am today. And I'm not perfect, but my wife, if I drug her in here right now, I am 99.9% certain she'd say he is a good husband, but it comes from work, right? It takes some
Yes.
work. It doesn't happen by, wishing or dreaming or praying or osmosis,
And it's the same with parenting. I
Yeah.
know my greatest challenges as being a single parent were my greatest learning opportunities as well. Where you hear your parent coming out of your mouth and you vowed and declared you're never going to be like them so that's what
Right.
happened for me. And so that was like, oh my gosh. So that was like, take stock of what's going on here. How can you do this differently? And I think what I learned to do was I learned to apologize when I got it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Parents are not perfect. People are not perfect. And in any given situation, whether it be in work or home life or wherever, we can get it wrong. And I
Absolutely.
think the biggest thing is, and the most liberating thing is just being able to say, oops, sorry, I seriously got that wrong. And I'm going to try and do better next time. And so that's what my relationship was with my daughter. She could handle anything, but if you were being unfair, no, that was like, she wasn't going to handle that well at all. Let's talk about your eldest son. And
Right.
look, your firstborn, they always have that extra special place because they are the first one. Describe for me what personality he has, because I believe that these children that die young are extraordinary beings.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to have to interject part of my story that you couldn't have known by reading my bio because it's just too complicated. But, with the way Gabriel came into my life was my bride and I were really good friends first. And I really believed that she was going to end up being my bride someday, but it would take a couple of years for that to, seep its way into her desires. Right. And so shortly before that actually began to take place, she actually she had went on a vacation out of the country and ended up having a fling with a guy, which was very uncharacteristic her life pattern. She did. And when she came back, we actually had finally started to move from a friendship towards, okay, I mean, for me, I was already all in romantically, but for her, she was just
Yeah.
beginning to embrace it. But little did she know, she was very petite. And the reason why that's important is because she ended up realizing she was pregnant. What was really interesting about that particular part of our story was, this is going to sound really weird. I'm just going to say this up front. It's going to
Yeah, go
sound
for
really,
it.
really weird. But before she went on this trip, and again, we weren't dating. She didn't cheat on me. She was, she was single. I just had this impression that she had been with a guy on that trip. But I hadn't, right to say anything about it when she came back or even, bring it up, nor did I have any proof. It was just this impression I had, But then, Helen, I totally forgot about it. You
Yeah.
completely forgot about it. And then, again, she was actually almost 3 months pregnant. And, shockingly, how could you guys not know? She had been fighting it for a few months, over the course of those few months, I should say, knowing, but she was so petite, you could not tell. She did not show at all. Right. And so we end up in my car and we're having a conversation. She looked at me and she said, I have something to tell you. And when I tell you, it's going to change everything. Cause I'd already shared my heart of, the future that I wanted. And, I told her at that point, I said, listen, there's nothing you could do that is any worse than anything I've ever done in my lifetime, And so I just don't see that changing anything. And then the strange thing was I remembered the impression. And so I looked at her before, because she was clearly very emotional. She was beginning to tear up and struggling to tell me what she needed to say. And so I looked at her and I said, you slept with someone while you're on that vacation. And her eyes got, buggy eyed and looked at me in total shock. And she goes, yes, but that's not the full story. And I did not have an impression about the second part, the pregnancy I didn't see coming. So, she told me she was pregnant, and, it was a shock, because I had my own ideas of what our relationship was going to look like, and that we'd be, married for a period of time and then have kids eventually and all that stuff. But, after just a few moments, I looked at her and I said, it doesn't change anything for me. And I think she was pretty blown away by that. Go ahead.
That impression that you got, I believe that was also preparing you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
That on some subconscious level, that you were already getting ready to hear that and to embrace that.
Yeah, so, I don't think there's any question. I think you're absolutely dead on. And so, but ultimately, she's pregnant, right? And then my wife is Puerto Rican. I hadn't brought that up yet. The only reason why I'm bringing that up is, being in a Hispanic family, they have certain views of certain things when it comes to the father of a child, traditional views. Yeah. So, the next several months became, as she was working out the next 6 months of her pregnancy, became very confusing time for her. A lot of different opinions on what she should do or not do. The guy who was the biological father, he lived in another country. So they had talked on the phone a few times. And he had the means to be able to come and visit, but he just made a bunch of empty promises, basically, and never followed through. Ultimately, he never had anything to do with Gabriel and never came to visit and fell off the face of the earth for decades, or decade and a half. But after about a year and a half, things settled in, and eventually we ended up agreeing that we were the right fit for one another. So I know that was kind of a long turn off of your question, but it was kind of necessary to grow context in that I became his dad when he was about 16 months old. Now, I was in his life from afar, in a sense, because we still had our friendship. I just wasn't introduced to him as anything more than that until at 16 months he was in our wedding and we got married. And now, that said, I don't refer to him as anything but my son. He was always my son. I'm the only father he ever knew. I don't even think twice about it until I'm telling my story and just trying to be accurate,
Yeah, and I get that. My stepmom always just introduces me as her daughter, and I do the same. She's my mom.
Absolutely.
And then people get confused and go, didn't your mom die when you were young? I believe that the bond is still incredibly strong, whether or not they're your biological child or not. I know some people will disagree with that, but when you love a being, don't you just love them with your whole entire heart and who you are? Yeah.
No, absolutely. There were even times, let me say just real quick to that point, there were even many times as he was growing up, because most people didn't know our story. There were reasons this biological dad ended up not being the nicest guy and was involved in some stuff that we weren't comfortable with. And so we actually had the conversation with Gabriel about it once he turned 14 years old, when he became a freshman in high school. So this wasn't a topic that we talked about publicly, right? Too much. But the funny thing was, to your point, is over the years, he really, you would have thought he had my DNA, because there were so many personality traits and character traits that we were a lot of like. And he has, a lot of things, especially his looks. Thank God for that, because his mother is beautiful. But, he had that from her side. But to your point, there actually were a lot of people who were shocked to find out that we didn't share DNA just because of the similarities that we had.
Right. So just off the top of your head, what are the words that describe him?
Adventurous, hard-headed, intense, intelligent, fun-loving, tender. I can't say it in one word, but one of the that I always loved about him, that we all loved about him, is he had a really spot for elderly people in particular, was always going out of his way. I've, many stories that I heard later on, that stuff that he would do we didn't even know about, definitely he was very, very intent on his family. He loved family.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. So, obviously, he died in a plane crash, as
Correct.
we mentioned earlier, and he loved flying, didn't he?
He went up at 8 years old, Helen. 8 years old, he went up with his Uncle Danny in a little aircraft, caught the bug, never let go of it. We thought, because he said he wanted to be a pilot at 8, we thought at some point it's going to be something else. And he just didn't let go of it. And then by the time he got in high school, some things began to come together that actually allowed us an opportunity for him to even begin to fly, because we didn't have the money. And there's a series of, I would just call them miracles, that actually presented him the opportunity to even be able to do that and chase his dream and fulfill, at least the first part of it, which was becoming a pilot.
Yeah, wonderful. So when his accident happened, how did you as a family and you as an individual cope with that? Because these are like, you can't even explain what these moments are like to others. So
no,
I'm going to get you to, though.
we're gonna give it a go. We're gonna give it a go,
because I think the next step to that is then how you came together as a unit and dealt with that together, and the healing that was involved in that. So I think it's really important to just understand, first of all, you didn't just, this happened and then you went on to be this really together family that just managed to get through it without any effort.
Right. Yeah, I think one thing I want to frame first, because I do think it's really important, and to your point, our journey as a family, we had some ups and downs as a family, and we had some challenges. One of the things, I don't think I put in my bio, but in 2012, so this would have been about 7 years before Gabriel passed. So the boys were much younger, but Amárillys, we were wakeboarding, and she suffered a spiral fracture of her femur. That's a whole other story, because we almost lost her, because we had to drive hours. We were out in the lake out in the middle of nowhere. We had to drive several hours to a hospital that could actually handle the type of surgery. And we were very fortunate that she didn't bleed out. And it was just awful. But anyway, with that, she couldn't even set her foot on the ground for over 5 months, couldn't drive, couldn't, walk, couldn't do anything. So with 3 small children, that, changes things, So what I just want to point that out quickly, that, we had some much smaller challenges than losing a child, nothing to compare it to, but we did have challenges that we rallied as a family.
Yes.
And so ultimately, when Gabriel passed, it was, as you said, the first chapter of my book is not a grieving book, although it does cover how we handled the grieving process. It's really more a book about living and overcoming fear and that kind of stuff. But I want to just say that part for this reason. First chapter is called The Worst Nightmare, because that's what it is, right? Yeah. And so the morning after he passed away, our other 2 boys, Joel and Liam, were only 9 and 14 at the time. And they had slept through the night. They didn't know we were up all night, knowing that he had went down, and waiting, and a very confusing night with misinformation and all these different things that happened. And so eventually, we did find out about 3:30 a.m. that he was indeed gone. And so they woke up at 7:30, came out, and I had to have what I call the impossible conversation, which was letting them know, what happened with their brother. And of course he was, as you can, I've read how you've described Tal, and it sounds like they have so many similarities, just bigger than life personalities, right?
Yeah.
And it's their older brother. So you've this bigger than life personality that is also their brother, right? So, they took it really hard, as you can imagine. And then once the emotions, settled down enough to where, we could talk a little bit, I looked at them and I just said, boys, we have 2 choices. And this has a lot to do, Helen, with, I do believe I didn't manage with pain, as you know. No one gets an advantage with the pain of losing a loved one. But I did have the advantage of, because of what I did, for a living for so many years, I have been involved in a lot of situations with families while they, I've been in hospital rooms while a loved one passes away right in front of us. And then, the emotional fallout from that, and some that have lost their children, some that had a baby that was stillborn, a couple that I was with in the hospital room, so I had experience with what people go through, and I had at least observed where there were some healthy coping mechanisms. And then I had observed where, unfortunately, as you know, doing this show too, a lot of people end up in divorce. A lot of people end up where their families implode. So for the sake of the listeners listening to us today, I just want to lay that context, because we're not superhuman people. We're not perfect. No. We're none of those things. But I did have a slight advantage in that way. So what I said to the boys was, we have two choices. We can choose to live the rest of our lives completely trapped in our pain, and this tragedy be the thing that we remember and live by every single day, and only focus on how he died. And what I said specifically was, and that's going to keep us from being who we were created to be.
Yes.
But there's a second choice. The second choice is we're going to choose life. And what that meant for us, I said, boys, look at your brother. He was adventurous. Many of the words that I just used to describe him, he was adventurous. He attacked life. He taught himself guitar. He was an amazing photographer. We're very blessed to have probably thousands of photos if I were to try to categorize them all. Amazing photos. He graduated a year early. I mean, he was just this adventurous soul, right? So he attacked life. The only way, and I sincerely believe this, Helen, I said, the only way that we can honor him is to honor the way he lived by us doing the same. Not the same things, but just living with that kind of passion and intention. So that was one part of it. Now I should point out the second part, because, again, that doesn't help you in the moment with the pain side of things at all. It's just the beginning of kind of a mindset, if you will, of, we're going to live through we're never going to get over him, but we're going to live through this situation that we find ourselves in. The second part was grieving. And I just said, yes, we don't know what this is going to look like. And to everybody listening right now, you may have been through it already, or, we're all going to lose someone at some point, right? If we live long enough, it's just bound to happen. And so I just said, I don't know how it's going to feel. Each one of us, because, family of four, so a little different dynamic than, even what you experienced. I can't imagine what you experienced. It's just, it's a different deck of cards, right? So for us, it was the four of us. And I said, so, we don't know when we're going to be angry, when we're going to be sad, when we're fighting depression, when we're going to laugh, when we're going to want to cry. But here's what we are going to do. We're going to do it together. And we're not just going to do it together. We're going to do it very openly. And so just to kind of illustrate that, this wasn't, a command for, okay, boys, you have to talk when you're feeling sad and you show your emotions. But as the dad, if I'm feeling sad, I'm going to go slip into a room in private, and then that's where I'll cry. And then I'll come out, having dried my eyes, and I'll be strong and, like nothing ever happened. No, we're going to do this openly. And that includes me. And so we've done that. Helen, it's been not quite 4 years, which, as is 3 minutes.
Yes.
Yes. But that's, the pattern that we established. And there's no question that us having sometimes difficult conversations, I call them courageous conversations, because one of the big mistakes I think that people sometimes make when they're grieving together is they're afraid to ask the other person how they're doing. And sometimes it's because they're afraid they're going to trigger the other person. I'll just use my wife and I as an example. We may be going throughout the day, and if I'm just watching her, looks like maybe it's a pretty good day, right? And then I'm feeling it kind of is too. But we learned to ask each other those questions then as well. Because when we're dragging and we're really grieving hard and it's all over us, it's not hard to figure that out, right?
No.
So
yeah, you're right.
Exactly. Those are easy to spot. So we would do that with each other, and we just did it in a very simple form. It would just be simply, hey, how you doing with Gabriel today? And you know what, Helen? Sometimes it would be, you know what? I'm good today. I'm good. I'm okay. I'm okay. And then there are other times where we'd be happy and it would immediately, or we would appear happy and it would immediately, spark deep emotion and it would shift. And some people are very afraid of that, but it's incredibly healthy to do that. And I believe that's been a huge part of our healing part of this journey.
I love what you're talking about, being courageous, because being courageous means that you don't have to suppress or hide those feelings of anger, maybe even shame or guilt or,
Exactly.
Frustration or any of that. It's all healthy emotion. And I think this is the key to the grieving, is being able to be good at showing that and have a safe place to be able to deal with that. However, we've been taught, many of us, just to suppress our emotions,
Right.
put on this public face, don't really show what you're thinking or feeling, and certainly don't say it either.
Yeah. No, you're right.
And then I think that really impacts on the grieving process. So what have you learned, or what can you give people around if they're particularly fearful? Because I feel that fear
Yeah.
is a big thing that resides within us that actually controls a lot of our thought processes and how we behave. So for those people who are trapped in fear in their grief, like maybe this is going to happen to another one of the children, so I better keep them safe,
Absolutely. Yeah.
or fear around anything, what can you recommend?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what you just said, fear is a very real thing that everybody deals with, right? You don't need to lose someone to deal with fear. But to your point, when you do lose someone, there's opportunities for fear to come knocking on your door in ways that you've never had to experience before, and we certainly did face that. There's no question about it. As a matter of fact, 2 years after the accident, my middle son, Joel, got in a horrific car accident. And in short, that when I arrived on the scene, the paramedics, the police, everybody that was there, they said he should not be with us. And he literally walked away with one little scratch. You'd be blown away if you saw the vehicle, because it literally imploded around him. And somehow he crawled out of this little space with hardly even getting a cut and got out. But, there's all those different things that can happen that fear wants to come after you. One of the things that, I think is true is the opposite of fear is love, and the opposite of love is fear. Fear never co-mingles with love. So I'm going to give you a quick example. I was asked before and even after Gabriel passed, hey, did you ever have fear with him flying? And obviously once he passed away, did you ever have regrets? And I really mean this. My answer was no, I don't regret. And here's the reason why. I had to fight fear, as did my wife, initially, to allow him to chase his dream to become a pilot. The first time we were there to see him get in that plane and fly off by himself, it was really, really surreal. It was exhilarating in some ways, where I was able to, I really apologize. My dog was supposed to be outside. I'm sure you can hear that.
No. This is real life.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, seriously, I'm totally okay.
Thank you. So, we watched him fly up, and I'm super excited. And then he comes around and he gets ready to come down. And it's like, that's when fear grips. Like, oh my gosh, he's got to love this thing, But here's the truth. We loved him. Yeah. That was his passion. It's what he wanted to do. It's what he wanted to spend the rest of his life doing. So anything short of loving him and allowing him to do that would have been giving into that fear, and we would have been stealing from his future. Now, did we get the result we wanted? No. For a while we did. We got to really enjoy him for several months, just living the dream, right? but it just didn't last as long as we had hoped. But that's a really real thing. And so, I think the love factor really, really matters when you start talking about something like this. So that said, what I've found myself doing, for example, with, my middle son starting to get in the car, even before the accident, he'd get off or get out and get in the car. Or even sometimes, my wife or my middle son or my youngest son would be in a car and going somewhere. And those thoughts come to you, right? It's like, oh my gosh, what if? And I would force myself to think loving thoughts. I know that sounds kind of strange probably to some people, but I start to think about their future. I start to think about the good things in their life, literally to crush that initial fear. Now, I've found that works. It may not work for everybody. I don't know, but it's been such a big deal for me to be able to just focus on, if I love someone, if I keep that loving state of mind, then fear has for myself too. Same thing. We fight internal fears too, right? But when we love ourselves and give ourselves permission to dream and give ourselves permission to take risks, give ourselves permission to fail, that's a version of loving ourselves, and it'll help you overcome fear that keeps you from living the life that you really desire to and were meant to live.
Yes. It steals your happiness, doesn't it? If you live in fear for too long and too intensely. That story that you just shared just reminded me of what I did with Tao when she was little. She had night terrors. So what we used to do is put angel light around her. So it would be protecting the house, it would be protecting the car. And it's really funny because when I would be in my car, and I wasn't fearful being in my car driving, but I had these fears, and it would remind me of what I used to do with her. And so I used to do the same with myself, just wrap myself in all this beautiful energy and just say, okay, it's going to be fine. It's, I'm just going to embrace this. I can't stop living my life because, and you get that sense of calm that comes back within you. And I think that's really important. So I learned to live my life with peace and calm, which I had never really lived my life easily before because I was such a perfectionist. And we won't even go there, but it's such a beautiful space I live in now. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And what you say, love conquers fear every time.
It really does.
Let's talk self-love, because I see around me so many people who don't consider themselves worthy, who have trouble looking in the mirror and even telling themselves, the person they see, that they love that person. Let's talk that.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think, shame is definitely one of the overriding emotions that people feel that are dealing with that. And it's a real thing. And it's very sad. You brought up, being a perfectionist, and it's funny because you'll love this. One of the chapters in my book is actually called Perfectly Imperfect. But I'm bringing that up because I think that's a big part of it. We need to come to a place, and I'm going to give a couple ideas on how you might be able to do that. But we need to come to a place where we recognize perfection. For us to pursue perfection as a human being is a really rotten goal.
Yes, I agree.
It's a bad goal because we're never going to be perfect human beings. And so, being able to embrace a failure doesn't have to be this thing that keeps you in this state of failure. It can be just something that's a catapult to, okay, I learned what not to do. I learned it doesn't work that way. And so it can be a catalyst rather than something that traps you in shame that, oh, I failed. My divorce being one of those. As I said, my parents ended up being married for 65 years. When I got that divorce in my late 20s, I did fight shame, and I finally came to this place where it's like, okay, if I allow this shame, if I allow myself to think that I'm this, crummy man and husband who's incapable of having, a really great relationship, that's exactly what I'm going to end up with. Nothing, right? or I'll end up in another really bad relationship. And so we kind of talked about this part already, but what did I do? Same thing you did. I started to study the attributes and the characteristics that I wanted to live by, the things that I wanted to improve in. So rather than allowing myself to get stuck in that self-loathing state, and this is what I would recommend doing. If you're stuck in that, and this is going to be a super simple exercise. A lot of really major breakthroughs they come by much simpler methods than a lot of times we think. I would get out a sheet of paper. And then what I would do is I'd probably do just a very simple, just a big old 2-sided column thing, right?
Yeah.
Not pros and cons, but the same way you would make one up to do pros and cons. And then the first thing I would write on the left is all the things that I have overcome. Now, the reason why I say that is because I've coached a lot of people over the years who have felt like there was nothing you could even put on that list and that they had been abject failures. And yet, get in a quiet place and really start to think of what are some of the obstacles, because I'm still here, right? That's what you need to tell yourself.
Yes.
Those who are listening to me, whatever you've been through, whatever tried to knock you down, whatever tried to take you out, you're still here. So write down the things that you've overcome, and don't be, again, a perfectionist about it. I don't mean that you did it perfectly, but it didn't take you out, right? You're going to find that you have done far more than you really give yourself credit for. That's one. And then on the second side of that, I would write out all of the attributes that I really admire. Loving, kind, peaceful, whatever those are. I would write out.
Not necessarily about yourself, just
not necessarily about yourself this second, right? As you're writing it, right?
Yes.
And so I would just write out those things that I value, because you got to remember, if you're feeling shame and self-loathing, it's because you're not living up to a value system. But if you never taken the time to figure out what those values are that you would feel like you're living up to your potential, like you are living a valuable life. If you don't know what those things are, you're kind of shooting in the dark, right? So I would write out those things that I find valuable. And maybe you need to look at other people you admire first, think about people that you love. You think they're amazing. I want to be someone who's really honest like they are. Maybe I've kind of lied a lot. I want to become someone who tells the truth, and I would write those things out. And then what you do is you just begin to take one day at a time, and you begin to find ways to grow in those areas, and nowadays there's so many ways to do that, right, Helen? You can listen to a podcast just like this. You can read books. You can Google too. Be careful with Google, right? Google's got a lot of great information, but it's also got some crazy stuff. But get help. Maybe you need a therapist, or if you're religious, maybe it's a pastor or whatever. Maybe you just have really great friends, or maybe you're a young person listening to this and you have really solid parents, but you've been afraid to talk to them because you feel like, you don't measure up, or they would be disappointed or whatever. And, bring in those people that you love and that love you into this as well. And I think you just take it one step at a time. I think a lot of times, and I want to hear your thoughts on this too, but I think a lot of times people try to go from 0 to 100. They try to okay, I need to change. Let's see, today is June 6th. So by June 30th, give yourself a break. You've got to give yourself a break too.
Yeah, too many expectations on ourselves too, like having to do grief or anything in a certain way. Actually, you do it in the way that works for you and how your body needs to express it in the time. Like I still have days. I'm 6 years down the line now, and I will still have a day where I just come unraveled. I will often just be walking and it'll just be that overwhelming emotion. And, I wished Tal was back here with me, seeing this or being with me. And I don't deny that. When you allow yourself to sit with whatever emotions you're experiencing and actually just process them, then you release them. You don't hold on to them, and they've got some place to go, and you're actually honoring what you're feeling And I think that's so, so vital. You also, and I know we're heading towards time, your thoughts on leading an intentional life, because I feel that when we have these big tragedies, it brings it into focus 100% that we really need to be living the way
Absolutely.
we
You know, I
want to be
think when
living.
you have the general posture that you and I are talking about, that we both have had, in that, you know, we still feel the pain, right? And I would say this too. I love what you said, because I've had people ask me about the pain factor, and I've said even publicly, I just did a talk the other day in front of, you know, several hundred people. I don't even pray as a person of faith. I don't even pray for the pain to go away. I don't want the pain to go away. It represents the love that I have for my son, and you do for your daughter. And so it's not about pain. It's about learning
Absolutely.
to, as you said, move through it at an appropriate time when it hits. And so, you know, as you do that, you tend to be able to have some creative energy towards, now that I know in a really intimate way that life is such a vapor, I can give some creative energy towards, what do I want to do with the time that I have, as you just said. And that's something that we did, Helen. That's something we had. Again, we're
Yes.
back to the, you know, the phrase I like, courageous conversations. My wife and I began to talk about everything. I mean, we took every area of our life that we could think of and lifted up that rock and looked under it and asked ourselves some really tough questions, you know, and everything from
Wow.
what we were doing to make a living, you know, to make money, what the way we spent our time on a daily basis, who we spend our time with on a daily basis, some of the situations that felt responsible to be a part of that really created drag in our life, and really realized that, you know what, we don't have, that's called boundaries. We don't have to allow that particular
Yes.
person or this particular situation to, you know, become a toxic soup to our life. We looked at all that stuff. And then ultimately, what I think it did for me, I'll just speak for myself, is I had some things I talked about doing for a long time. One of those was starting a transformational and you know, speaking company. I talked about that for years. That didn't come out of Gabriel passing away. I just didn't have the courage to do it before he passed away, right? And then my
Yes.
wife, she's an artist. That's her expression of big, bold, brave, is, you know, what we call it. She became an artist, is doing some amazing things, but she had to, you know, get really vulnerable with that and realize that this is a passion of mine. But now I'm going to have to extend myself in ways I've never done before. I'm going to have to be more vulnerable than I've ever been before. And I'm going to have to let people know that this is something that I do and that I want to do. And so you take steps, and some of it may be, you know, again, kind of back to a list thing. This is a different list, but writing out, what were some of your dreams as a kid? What were the passions? What were the things that brought you? I love you've used the word
Yes.
energy a few times. What brings you energy, you know? And in some people's cases, it may be, you know what? I've been in this job for 20 years and I've hated it for 19 and a half, you know? And, you know, you may need to make some wise choices in how you transition out of that. But ultimately, you don't have infinite time on this planet, and we don't know how long it is. And doggone it, don't spend the rest of your life continuing to do something that you know just sucks the life out of you. Even if you have to start, maybe it's a business you've always dreamed about. Even if you have to start doing that on the side, start taking steps that lead you towards the life that you dreamed about, because you're the only one that can do it. That's the thing. No one can do that part for you.
And sometimes you have to be letting go of the stuff that is
Yep.
not working for you in order to clear the space, to open up the opportunities to do the things that
Absolutely.
you do want to be doing. And so you have to be courageous to make that
Absolutely.
shift, to let some stuff go. So what is your definition of being big,
Yeah, big, bold, and
bold,
brave.
and
There's
brave?
three things. I actually came up with this later. It was almost by accident. I was on an interview with a gentleman. And he said, "Give me three things," and I'm like, "Okay, that you think about people." And I rattled it off, and then I'm like, "Hey, I actually believe that." I believe we were created, you know, and so I wrote it down really quick. And now you go on my website, you'll find it. But I believe that we were all created to be courageous. You know, we've used that word a lot, but that's one of my main personal values, that we were created to be courageous, meaning it's already in you. You may need to learn how to tap into it. You may need to learn how to, fire it up at the right time, but it's in there. The second thing is I believe that we were created with a creative genius in every human on the planet. And we don't have time for that in this, we're winding down here, but I'm going to make a bold statement. I believe that I can actually prove it for people that have faith. I can prove it biblically. And even if people that don't have faith, I can prove it scientifically, like for real, that we have a unique creative genius.
Yes.
And that's part of what you're talking about a minute ago when you said, how do you transition or if you're doing things that you really don't want to do, but you won't let go of them. When you're holding on to things that were really never meant for you to be doing or that are not passionate for you, you're cutting off your creative genius to do what really is inside of you. So to me, pursuing that creative genius is another part of living big, bold, and brave. And then for me, the third part is we're all created to be compassionate. Yeah. I think no matter what we've been through, and I know you and I are in complete alignment on this because that's why we're on this call today. We were created to be compassionate. It doesn't matter what we've faced. It doesn't matter what gut punches we've suffered. At the end of the day, we may need to take a time out. We may need to take some time to grieve or to process, or, we can't necessarily help everybody right away. We need to be able to get to a good place. But ultimately, we need to be compassionate for other people and find every possible way we can to add value to other people's lives. And to me, if you do all those things, if you're courageous, if you attack life, you're adventurous, you pursue your creative genius, you're going to make a big impact doing that. And if you're compassionate, you're going to help a lot of people. That's big, bold, brave.
Oh, beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. Some final questions for you. What's the best thing that's happened
this
to
conversation
today?
for sure. Yeah, I was really, no, for real. I was really looking forward to connecting with you because especially, after I read Tall's story and some of the even words you used, they would have been good friends. I really mean it. I feel like when I heard you describe her, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like his doppelganger,
So who knows what's happening?
That's right.
Maybe they are connected. I mentioned this. Tal divinely guides this podcast. She brings these beautiful guests to me. So it's not by accident that you and I are speaking. And maybe it is those two getting up to mischief and, who knows?
We don't know, do we? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in that. So anything is possible. All right.
You're just starting your day, though. I will point out, I hope you feel the same way right now, but you got the rest of the day to go. So I hope you have something even better hit your way today.
You know what? When I have these conversations, it just fills my heart up with so much that it's overflowing, and that sets the tone for the rest of my day. So how can it not be the greatest day?
Come on.
When you start off like this, having these conversations, they're so special. The next question. Alrighty. What are you most grateful for? I used to use proud, but now I changed it because I feel like grateful is a much better reflection of what I want to be asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, that's super easy. It's my bride and my boys. I'm grateful for a lot of other things, but that's number one.
Yes, that connection with family. Take away everything else, and those are the key things that are left. Yes,
that's right.
Okay, your go-to or go-tos when your day turns to custard. When it's not going so well.
I love that one. Well, I won't shy away from the fact that an occasional glass of red wine does sometimes shift my mood a little bit. But I think to your point though, because sometimes things happen earlier in the day that don't go your way, right? And so, a glass of red wine is probably not appropriate at 11 a.m. I think, what I've learned to do is relatively new for me. I would say only the last couple of years is if I feel like things are really not going my way, or I'm really struggling with creative thought, having a hard time getting work done, whatever, things like that. I now give myself permission to step away and go do something that brings me joy. And so for me, that could be going to the gym. It could be going for a walk if the weather's nice. If I live closer to the beach, I would do this I would find an excuse every single day, right? But I give myself permission to go do something. And it doesn't have to be for the rest of the day. It could be for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Go do something that brings me joy to kind of break that cycle and reboot.
Yes, that pattern. Yes, break the energy.
Yeah.
Just lifts you up, doesn't it? And what is your final thoughts on what you would like to leave our listeners with? But before we go there, how can people reach you? And then we'll go with your final thoughts.
Yeah, two ways. I'd love for them to follow me on Instagram. So it's just at Clint Hatton. And so that would be one way. And then, especially, we're going to have listeners from all over the world, especially where you're based. So they can go to my website to learn more about me. That's bigboldbrave.us. And then if they would like the book, then it's easier for especially those who don't live here in the United States just to go to Amazon or any online retailer.
Yeah, fantastic. Clint, I have to say, what an absolute pleasure it has been spending this hour with you, just going where the conversation took us. You have shared some wonderful, wonderful insights on a beautiful way to be living post-tragedy of any description. It doesn't just have to be around death or loss.
Right.
It can be with whatever's happening in your life at this moment. And I can't thank you enough for taking this time to share those insights. So last thing you'd like to leave everybody with?
I want you to take to heart the three things that I said earlier that I believe about every human being, because it's true about you. And I know you could be listening to this and maybe you've suffered a pretty tough loss or a series of them, but it's not over for you. And it is going to require a courageous decision to choose that, okay, I've been dealt some tough cards, but I'm going to live, and I'm going to live well. And I just want you to know, don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Connect with Helen, connect with me, connect with someone else. Don't do it alone. I guess I want to leave that as probably the last thought. Don't allow yourself to get isolated from human beings. Human connection is always going to be the greatest catalyst to pulling you out of the mud and sending you on a trajectory that's going to bring you the joy you really deserve.
Amen to that. Thank you very, very much, Clint.
Thank you, Helen.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. Let me know how I'm doing, or if there's a topic you'd like covered, by clicking on the Healing to Be You Gmail link or going to the Healing to Be You website. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button, and please share if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode. Until next time, be kind to you and take good care.